our wonderful recording message.
Je compris. J'arrive pas. I don't like to click on that.
Hello, everybody coming in. Thank you so much for joining us. Maybe we can wait a few more minutes. Some people are still jumping in. And please, if you can, keep your mics on mute. Of course, besides when you need to ask a question. That way we don't hear ourselves speaking to each other. Hello, Kaz. If you could please put your mic on mute too. So it looks like we have almost everybody from the program. So maybe we can start. Thanks everyone for jumping in. As you know, the University of the Underground was founded in February 2017 and is a free, pluralistic, and transnational university based in the basement of nightclubs and actively working with both institutions and nightlife. So, as part of Tour de Moon, the University of the Underground is running a music incubator program from October to December that provides practical challenges and opportunities for young music makers to develop their craft, as well as a series of lectures on music making and political and cultural theory. So today we have someone, Sydney, could you please?
Sorry.
Please keep in mind to mute yourself when you aren't speaking, because we are quite a few people on the Zoom. So today, as part of the series, we have Michele Spano. I hope I'm saying it right. Michele Spano. Michele Spano.
Michele, it's okay.
And I'll let you present yourself and your topic. If you could just describe yourself visually so that anyone who has difficulty seeing has a better idea of who's speaking. So I'm Chloe, I have blonde hair, I'm white, I'm wearing a red sweater, and I'm currently in my apartment. So now I will pass it on to you.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very glad being here tonight. Thank you to the University of the Underground for the invitation. I'm Michele Spano. I'm associate professor in law at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris. I teach something in between law and philosophy. I'm a male, white, with mustache and a little beard, wearing a Bordeaux, a pale red pullover. I'm Italian, even though I teach in France, and so probably this will give you a reason of this strange accent I have while speaking in English. I do hope you will understand what I will say. My topics of research usually are the history and theory of private law. And I'm especially interested in, this is the theme to which I devoted most of my research work, on how private law deals with the common or the collective aspects of social life. So collective interests, collective subjects, common goods, and so on and so forth. So apparently private law is something that is considered to be at odds in respect with all that is common or plural or collective or more than one, let's say. And all my research try to produce some evidence of this possible intertwining between private law and the commons. As to our today class, I prepared something, more general. I would like to begin with to say something on the law and the importance of studying the law, or having an idea, an actual idea of what the law is and how the law functions, for everyone. I mean, I think that being conscious of the part that law has in giving a shape to our form of life, it's very important. And further, even more if our objective is to criticize our present form of life. So I would begin with saying something generally on law. Then I would try to give you a sense of how the legal debate on the commons began, and how it was developed mainly in Italy. I will give you some reason of how to be, except parochialism, for being interested, especially into the Italian experience of the commons. And then I will try to sketch some perspective on how private law and the commons could be part of a conversation. So more or less 3 parts. Hope that everything is clear. And I'm sorry, I don't see you, so I'm here with my screen, and I do hope that everything is clear right now. But if anything is not clear, please raise your hand, or let me know if I should be more clear, or I'm open to questions. So what I would like to begin with is precisely this idea of the law. The relationship between the law and social sciences is a very difficult one. I don't know how familiar you are with social sciences in general, but even though if you have only a peripheral interest in the social science, I think you could understand that actually the relationship between some very important scholars in the social science, in anthropology, in sociology, in philosophy, in political theory, towards the law, it's a very hostile and negative one. For instance, I would say that there are 2 major modes in which social sciences consider the law. One could be the one of considering it the worst thing ever, and these 2 guys, Pierre Bourdieu, the one with and Michel Foucault, the one wearing leather, are probably the 2 best examples of this interpretation of the law. According to them, the law is nothing more than the violent end of political power. And so, in fact, if you are searching for the law, if you are researching about law, you will you should inquire into prisons or on police. So the idea is that the law is mainly made up by violence, made up by interdictions, by orders, by imperatives, by repression, etc. So there is this idea of law as something bad, morally bad, and very tied to political repressive powers, and something from which one should escape. I mean, the idea is there is law, so it's better for me to get away from that, get away from the law. Then there is another way to consider the law, which is, on the contrary, a very sublime ideal of the law. And so you have, as examples, the idea, for instance, of a theory of justice, one of the most important books in normative or analytical political philosophy of the 20th century, written by John Rawls, this great American political philosopher, in which, in a book called A Theory of Justice, you won't ever find a discussion of the law per se. You will find justice, of course. You will find rights. You will find constitution, for instance, but never a true account of the law, of the proper functioning of the law. The other guy on my right is Jacques Derrida, another very important philosopher, French philosopher, very known in French theory. So maybe even in the Anglophone world, you maybe encountered him before. The idea of Derrida, which is at odds with Rawls, it's actually very similar in its core, because for him, there is justice, which is unconditional, and the law, which is conditioned. And so the idea is that the law could never met the ideal of justice. So in this way of considering law by the social science, the second way of considering the law, you will have this idea of the law as something which is transcendent, sublime, extremely connected to the values of the community. So we'll have mainly a discussion on rights and a discussion on the form of a constitution. I think that this idea of considering the law, whether as something very bad or something that under the label justice is very good, is probably due to this man called Martin Heidegger, one of the most important philosophers of the 20th century, a German one this time, that had this idea. He was very very fond of etymology, to try to get the meaning of a word by its etymology, by its origins, by its linguistical origin. And in the case of our word law, which in Latin sounds jus, the law, he thought that this word was coming from a verb, a Latin verb called iubeo, which means to go to order, to give an order, to impose something. The German word for that is the Befehl, this idea of order. So here you have the idea that law has to do primarily with imperatives, with interdictions, with order, as if the law functioned like that. You shall not do something, as in the Bible, as in the Decalogue, in this idea. So, in fact, you will see that the usual, the commonsensical way in which social sciences approach the law, consider the law, are mainly two opposite ways. In the first one, the Bourdieu's or Foucault's like way, central to the comprehension, the understanding of the law are criminal law, administrative law, public law, criminal law and administrative law. So the law is identified whether with the police or with the prison. In the other stream of social sciences, ranging from Rawls to Derrida, you will have mainly public law and constitutional law at the core of the discussion, and so justice and rights. But if a lawyer is confronted with that, something appears to be missing. What is left from this picture? I would say, as a lawyer, as a jurist, that actual law is out of this picture. And what is actual law then? And the answer is private law. So in fact, what social sciences usually overlook while thinking of the law is precisely private law. And private law is the infrastructure of our form of life. This is not to say that the law is something good, not at all. It's simply the way in which one can grasp the importance, the intensity through which law is present in our everyday life. Private law, it's the law that consider and discipline and govern every relationship we have now. In every part of the world, which is, of course, an historical and theoretical great question and even a great problem. But the point is that everything we do, everything, and even who we are, it's dependent on private law, which means it's dependent by contracts, property, and torts. These are the three pillars of private law, and these are really the things that mediate our everything we do. You have simply to think of, I don't know, purchasing a tube ticket, going in the metro in Paris and having a ticket for the underground means to be implicated in private law because you are signing a contract. But even things that seems to be more natural, for instance, as, I don't know, being born, this act or this experience is tied up with private law. And your status or your identity, your sexual identity, your familiar identity, your patrimonial identity, all these is imbricated in private law. So it's precisely this infrastructure of Western form of life that we should have in mind while thinking of the law. The law is not something that is necessarily in the form of the imperative, for instance. Usually law, a private law, it's in the mode of the indicative. So it simply describes how things go. And through this description, it's make a prescription, but its usual language is not that the one of an order, of giving an order, but it's to describe a relationship. Think of the fact that the civil code, this great text that in the continental Europe we have in order to govern all these 3 points, contract, property, torts, that in a common law system are much more regulated by courts, is in the mode of description. I mean, there is no you won't find an enunciation like you must sign a contract. No, the formula will be a contract is a law between two parties, etc., etc. So you see, this is very important to have in mind that there is no imperatives into the form of the law. And this idea, this sort of nightmare, which was produced and invented in a way by social sciences, is something that probably still make an obstacle to us to have another approach to the law, and especially private or civil law. I stress this fact, which is much more a continental way of thinking of private law, but every European language and English and even English have this twofold way of naming private law, private or civil. There is in French, there is in Spanish, there is in German, there is in Italian. These two ways of naming the same things and the same thing. And why civil? It's more interesting because civil means the law of a city, the law of the society. So we should think of how this idea of thinking private law as something especially tied to economics, to individual, to patrimony, to a market, it's something that was produced through history. And in fact, this conflation of private law as the law of economics and public law as the law of politics, it's a peculiar modern moment in the history of the law. Here you have the Code Civil de Français, the French Civil Code, this huge and very important text that disciplines all private law, and that, I mean, was seminal in all private law history, the history of law in Western societies. Then you have Friedrich Karl von Savigny, a very reputed German scholar, the founding father of the historical school of German law. And then you have Maurice Cohen, a scholar of common law. Both these, I mean, everyone here tried to demonstrate the relationship that in modern societies link public law, sovereignty, statutes, laws, and politics with private law, property, contracts, economics. So our experience of politics from the modern times reduce this idea of private law or civil law and this law of organizing society into, and split it into a twofold machine. On the one hand, we have this public law sovereignty, where we are called citizens in a way, and another part, which is private law, economics, property, contracts, value, etc., in which we are considered to be individuals. So the point is, you see, versus or with. The point is, modernity functions through these two poles machine. This could be the image, the shape of modern politics, if you want. Sovereignty and property, imperium and dominium, if you want to speak Latin. And in fact, both functions through the very same logic, which is a logic of individuality. But is that means an anthropological statement? I mean, possessive individualism as an anthropological figure, but from a logical point of view. This is very important in order to introduce the problem of the commons, because sovereignty, the state, the general interest, the idea that we as citizens constitute a body politic, an entire unity, a one, and as individual we are atomistic person into a market, contracting something, bargaining, selling, acquiring. It's perfect. It's in fact a homogeneous space in which the form of the law and the form of the individuals conflate. So the Leviathan, this idea of the body politics, I mean, one monster configured by every one of us. So you see if you don't see, this is the frontispiece of the great book by Thomas Hobbes, 1651, and in the frontispiece you have this monster, which is a big monster with a crown. So it's the body politics, the state, it's the public, it's politics, which is made by little men and women, so little individuals. On the other hand, you have the market, in which supposedly the same individuals are free to do everything they want, and this freedom, in fact, it's nothing but the freedom to sell. And what I'm trying to say is that both these institutional models, the public and the private one, in fact, concur to reproduce something that one could call capitalism or modern society. The important thing one should be aware of is that they function according to the same logics, which is the logics of individualism. So the important thing to consider is that you have from the French Revolution on, a moment in which this tension between multiplicity and individuality become apparent. So in fact, the multiplicity, which is represented by the state, by the Leviathan, from a logical point of view, it's not different from the individuality that should inhabit what we call the market. And so the commons appear precisely as a disruption of this public law, private law dichotomy. The commons were introduced in law as a way to criticize, to make a critique of this dichotomy, a dichotomy that in fact reproduced the same logic, the logic of individuality. So I will begin now with very general remarks on the legal history of the commons. I will focus mostly on the Italian version of the so-called legal commons. And this is not due to parochialism, but it seems a plausible move from a legal and comparative point of view, because the Italian approach to the commons has been especially significant. The man you have here is Stefano Rodotà, an important professor of private law in Italy that in 2007 was appointed as a chief of a commission to rewrite the part of the Italian Civil Code devoted to property. And while he was trying to reframe the dichotomy between a public property and a private property, he invented, in a way, the phrasing beni comuni, commons, common goods. In the law, I mean, because there is also another trend of discussion, of conversation in economics, but I won't consider it today. The idea so was to focus on the overcoming the dichotomy between the public and the private. This orientation in Italy originated at the beginning of the 90s, where within a context typical of the Italian and European and English, for instance, politics of the time, governments began to commodify public heritage or public services. Think of the trains in England, for instance, with Tony Blair, etc. And so they tried to privatize public services or public heritage in Italy, as you can imagine, as you could imagine. Public heritage is something more to which we are more sensitive. I mean, to sell the Colosseum, for instance. And this was the idea, in fact. I mean, it was not a joke. Through sale or privatization of state-owned businesses, states and governments transformed public goods and public assets into nothing but their own private property. And as you see, this move, the state or a government considering what should be collective, what should be a property of everyone, of every citizen, of every member of the body politics, is probably originated into this idea of the state or the public or the government as something that synthesizes the multiplicity, represent the multiplicity. But in fact, this collective moment is erased through the idea that it's something else, the state, a big individual that decide even for me. So as you see, commons are placed in between this idea. It's not something that is pertaining to the state, so to an imaginary big subject, big individual, nor something that every individual as a private owner owns by himself or by herself. So the idea was prompted by this crisis of the public sector, which is very interesting because you usually think of the commons as something against the private, but in fact, its legal origins are based on this critique of the public sector. And this debate should prompt us to offer another possible genealogy of private law, where the commons are located less beyond the public and the private, but rather between them. And so from this Commissione Rodotà, the commission held by Stefano Rodotà, a huge debate on the legal commons was developed then. The legal conversation on the commons could now be historicized into three major steps. The ontological question: what are the commons? This was the first crucial moment when the law had to decide whether, when we say the commons, we are referring to things or to rights or to a combination of the two. Then there was the problem of the relationship between function and entitlement. Are the commons defined more by the former or by the latter? In other words, should more emphasis be placed on what the commons do or on to whom they belong? And thirdly, how the commons should be governed and to what extent their governance depends upon their specific nature. Those three moments in the legal development of the commons do not proceed diachronically. They are rather deeply intertwined, and each answer is likely to have an impact upon any further questioning. So to have an answer to that, what I would propose in the end is a counter-hegemonic private law project. So to me, what could be done is to see if in the private law history, one can recover a history in which private law, as civil law was before modernity, before this coupling of public law and private law as this twofold machine that reproduce relations of capital was installed, there were different approaches to private law. And I think that the first move to do that is precisely to have a sense of this civil character of private law, of considering private law not as something naturally dealing with the individuals, naturally dealing with property, naturally dealing with circulation of goods, but rather as this technique and this knowledge that has to do with societal relationships. And in order to do so, one can, of course, mobilize very different sources. One source I mobilize is that of the so-called legal institutionalism, which is a German, French, and Italian trend in legal theory that tried precisely to demonstrate that the law and the state do not have a special link, but that in fact the law is something produced by social actors. Social actors could craft their own rules according to functional and contextual condition. They are able, the social actors, I mean, to self-regulate and govern themselves without the authorization of an overarching legislative power. And so this is something that that could be very interesting as a general move to reconsider private law as something in which the cooperative or the common moments, it's not something secondary, but it's probably the primary source, insofar we consider the law as something separated or logically separable from the idea of sovereignty, of public law, of the state, of this big individual, but something that collectively the many, not the whole, but the many could produce and transform. A similar conversation could apply to the core of private law, property. So the idea that property is nothing but ownership, as for instance, Blackstone in his commentaries on the laws of England famously stated. To Blackstone we hold these famous quotation on what what ownership is. That, and I'm quoting Blackstone, the sole and despotic dominion which one man claims and exercises over the external things of the world in total exclusion of the right of any other individual in the universe. So here you have this idea of, on the one hand, of using and abusing of the thing, of the good you own, and on the other hand, the fact that ownership is defined by the right to exclude others. So here again, one can do a counter-history, a counter-hegemonic approach to property, and demonstrate and try to demonstrate that, in fact, in the long history of property, ownership is just one possible instantiation of the rights. And for instance, use or cooperation or multiple accession, multiple use or condominium or trust are other possible figures on that. And I put the cover of E.P. Thompson, Customs in Common, a wonderful book on the history of social history of European societies, in which you precisely have a vast array of examples concerning this plurality or pluralization of property relationships, in which, in fact, ownership and exclusion are not necessarily the main feature of that. But for instance, you have examples of resource-specific kind of property, in which this means that, in fact, the thing is dictating its own legal regime. This is a very interesting path of inquiry, in which you have a ray-centric, a thing-centric way of considering the relationship between a subject and an object. Ownership means I am the sole, the sole master, sole the despotic dominion on a thing. In this other way of considering about property is the thing that dictate its proper regime of governance. And then you have social function of property, another line of thought in which we consider that property implies some social obligations. And so there's something that cannot be experienced without considering the rights of the others, or even better, that the participation or cooperation in producing a goods or reproducing a service is so crucial in doing that, that the ownership of that good or the ruling of that service should be done collectively. I think that my time is going, I mean, it's finishing more or less. I have a critique of naturalism in private law. I will skip that. I just want to finish by saying that there are, in fact, many other possible sources in order to demonstrate that the commons are, in fact, the real core of private law, which means, if you have understand more or less what I was saying, that in fact there is possibility of giving shape, which this is the law, giving a shape, giving a form to certain practices, to certain conflicts, to certain praxis. This is possible even beside this polarization between the big individual, let's say the state, and the private individual. It's possible to get give a form to a politics which is not the politics of the whole, nor the politics of one and only one, but a politics of the many, the politics of some. And this is, and for instance, other examples are possible. The occupation of the Teatro Valle in Rome, that it was transformed into a trust. So a classical figure of private law was used and mobilized and stretched in order to give formal shape to something, to a theater that was run by actors and audience jointly, or the community land trust, especially in Canada and United States, a way in which an anti-commodification struggle against private property of the land is run. And so the idea is to work on the affordability of houses. But I would like to end with another case coming from one of the most tremendous ethnographic studies of these late years, which is The Mushroom at the End of the World by Anna Tsing. I don't know if you're familiar with the text, but if you don't, I warmly recommend you to read it. This work provides a useful vantage point to grasp all the issues I have tried to address this evening. Tsing ethnography relates to an aromatic Japanese mushroom, the matsutake, and to all the local and global assemblages, entanglements, and relationships that the cultivation, production, and distribution of this mushroom imply. It's something very apparently very far from what we were saying. But one chapter of this fascinating story is devoted to the contracting of forests to individual peasants in Yunnan in China. The privatization of Chinese greenwoods is achieved through the use of a classical private law instrument, contract. And this, Tsing argues, offers an unprecedented chance for farmers. Indeed, privatization becomes a paradoxical site for the commons. Whilst this household contract represents a model of individual access and closure, so, the enemy of the commons, they are at the same time what allows for exchanges and encounters. One might say that we are witnessing a form of enabling privatization, a sort of paradox or oxymoron. Its structural incompleteness opens space for what's called fugitive commons. These are the unexpected human and non-human results of private assets. Those private assets cross the common space of life in a very ambivalent and ambiguous form. Nevertheless, this is all the charm of an analysis like Tsing one's, and maybe, I hope so, of the one I tried to sketch. Once get rid of moralistic assumption, she might be able to see how the relationship between value production and the commons is complex and difficult to fix. Tsing allows us to see how private law is now the infrastructure of assemblages in which capitalist capture and the popping up of what she calls latent commons are inextricable. Contracts manage the institution of private ordering, what Tsing calls evanescent mutualism, where capitalist extraction of value and contextual rules of social obligation conflate in and are reshaped by a new experience of trust. So in the end, I think that through the Matsutake, all these issues raised appears once again intertwined. Private law infrastructures, non-human agencies, natural yet artificial resources, and moral ambiguity. I think that's the best menu for a counter-hegemonic private law to come. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting and I think very in-depth for our participants. Does anybody have any questions? I saw that Ines was asking if you could repeat the 3 pillars of private law.
Yes, of course. This is a usual way of putting it in, for instance, law schools in United States. The idea is that private law is made by property, contract, and torts, which mean the relationship between subjects, contract between me and Chloe, for instance, in a relationship of work, or in a sentimental relationship, a marriage, or a selling something. All this is contract, property, the relationship between an individual and an object. And third, trust, which means civil liability, all the things that could happen while having a subject-to-subject relationship or having a subject-to-object relationship. So this is the general infrastructure. But if you think of this in a less abstract manner, you see that, in fact, this is the pros of our world. Because if everything we do, everything we are, I mean, it's not a good thing or a bad thing, it's simply a state of the affair. Our form of life, it's completely mediated, completely structured by these techniques. And this is very interesting because we usually overlook that. We consider it as something not particularly crucial. Sorry.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions from our incubator participants? Well, I had a question. I was wondering, because I think it might seem abstract to the participants of the program because they're like really making music right now, and so this subject probably seems a little far away, but I feel like it's something that music as a form of property really questions, because it's something that everyone is consuming collectively and can also really easily recreate. I mean, maybe I'm next to the subject, but I think there's some way that it's kind of questioning the notion of property, because, for example, a song like Champs-Élysées, anyone can sing this song in the street, but if you want to play it on a radio, you have to pay, or I don't know, there's this kind of, like you said, the format of the property that changes the law of it. And also at the same time, it seems like in the music industry, there are privatization of the exchange format of music, whereas before it was like public radio. Now there's Spotify, or I don't know, these paying platforms that also at the same time make the music more easily accessible, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense, but I wonder what you think about this.
No, that's thank you, Chloe. That's very interesting because you are I mean, I think your question raises two problems. One is that of IP, intellectual property, that, as you see, I did not cover in my talk because I'm not an expert of IP. And that's, I mean, I think it's symptomatic. The fact that property scholars and IP scholars, intellectual property scholars, are usually do not meet in the same person. They're people doing very different things. Because, of course, the problem of how to attach a capitalist value to creativity is still a very problematic stuff. But probably some lines of my talk of this evening are in conversation with this problem, because what I'm trying to suggest is that valorization, let's say value production, the processes of value production, how wealth is produced today, are more and more tied to cooperation, which means that we produce value while we are together. And so probably the law has to imagine forms of that regulate these production of value through common work or cooperation. And probably music and other creative experiences, performance, has to do with that. But what I would say is that probably this artistic paradigm or musical paradigm, it's now being generalized, because what we thought of material work or industrial work, it's more and more similar to creative work. And so this blurring of the line of manual and intellectual, so to say, or it's very important. It is not by chance, I think, that many scholars are now speaking of the commons as a mode of production. So commons are not things in the world, resources, but it's rather a way through which value is produced. And this is very interesting because it opens up to the problem of platform, for instance, as probably good infrastructure at the which in a way try to compensate this collective production. But on the other hand, the property of platform is usually private property. Think to Airbnb. I mean, to think that apparently have an institutional intelligence there, because I mean, to have a place where to be, or Uber, the need of moving myself in a city where there's no public transport, for instance. It's something that has to do with collective intelligence, with need for forms, need for cooperation, need for structures. The problem is that these collective intelligence is captured by the whole bad private property, because profits are from Uber, goes to Uber or to Airbnb itself, to Spotify. I don't know how it works, but Wikipedia or other things could be good examples for that. And all the literature on what is now called platform cooperativism, it's probably one line of thought that someone like you, I think, that are working with music, with artistic production, could be interested in. And there, I think there's very much to do for lawyers, because the problem is how to imagine an infrastructure, a form in which solidarity, complicity, cooperation are not something external, but are at the very core of the value production itself. I don't know if it's a proper answer.
No, yeah, that's really interesting. I think it brings up a lot of questions that, I mean, when you speak of those organizations and the way that they organize, it makes me compare with, for example, a show of a musician or something, how all the production, I mean, I don't know if this is a valid example, but I feel like before, theater was organized as troupes who would like stay together and move around. And now today it's more like in those different locations, people will just find the people and for one need, one moment, group them together for a production, and then it will dissolve and then something else. It's like a lot more sporadic than it was before. That's my impression, but I don't know much about it. And it seems like maybe this is kind of similar to what you're saying with the Uber system and these platforms that bring things together, but maybe not maybe kind of dissimulating it as something cooperative, but it's actually not that much, I guess.
I think that's very interesting, because this has to do with the consistency of a collective now, which is precisely at odds with this idea that the only way in which modern politics thought of the possibility of coordinating a multitude was to reduce it to a bigger one, a bigger subject that represents, I mean, these are complex logics, but the idea you were, I think, pointing to is precisely how we can think of something that is collective, that is plural, but that should not be reduced to a subject, but that could dissolve, that could reproduce, that could melt, that could, and this is, I think, from a philosophical point of view, an entire chapter of contemporary metaphysics. How to think of the collective, and probably it's precisely the thing we were discussing without saying it explicitly, but how collective could exist without becoming a one with big O. Collectivities, commons are precisely efforts to designate, to pointing out these different consistencies of being more than one, but not being whole. of course, modern philosophy, modern law, since they are built upon the reject of this logical quality of collective or multitude, should be reconstructed or deconstructed and reconstructing. Because the thing that I think it's important to have in mind that form is important, then the institutional force that animates collectivity, it's important. I mean, my point was against spontaneity or against naturality, was the idea that something as a form it's needed, but a form that could be in tune with this new way of being more than one. Well, voila.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I think it can inspire, I hope, the participants to find, at the very least, very cool lyrics for their songs, or cool ideas about this, and maybe their music will be able to think of some forms, just the way the mushrooms in the book does.
Yeah, I do hope so. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. So I don't know if you have any other way that the participants could eventually follow your work. If you want to put into the chat, like
I
if
could
you
put my email.
yeah,
It's
that would
okay.
be great if you're okay with anyone sending you questions from the program.
Yes, of course, I would be very glad to do that and to continue the conversation with you.
Super cool. So that way, yeah, everyone can see that in the chat. And thank you so much for all these amazing references and ideas. It was really interesting. We actually have right now our next lecturer who is in the Zoom. So if
Yes,
you want to stay, you can.
I have to go because I have my child that is dinner time for him. So thank you for that, but I couldn't.
No worries. Sounds good. Yeah, dinner is important. Well, have a great dinner, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
For
Thank you
coming.
very much. I'm just trying to get out.
I think you can just leave, like you can just close it.
Okay.